This is Mr. S. You'll notice that I'm wearing dark goggles. Why, you might ask? Because I need goggles, and it was bright in here. Maybe that'll help you pay attention, as today we're going to talk about what to do once you have the base piece of your solar car ready to build. You'll see that we have our top view from our earlier videos where we were designing our solar car, and now we're going to go through the process of how you're going to build it. Of course, you're going to start out with a piece like this that is the base piece. I'm going to cut that for you, and it's the only piece I'm going to cut. The reason is we want to make sure that these edges are nice and perpendicular and straight. That way all of our measurements off there will work. The first thing we need to do to build our car once we have the base is we need to put on the lines for the bearings as well as mark the gear slot so we can cut it out. So luckily, because we drew our top view in full size, you'll see that my base of the car fits right over top of the top view. That's going to give me some advantages when I'm marking my bearing lines and gear slot. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take my car, or the base of my car, and I'm actually going to just put it right next to my drawing, and that's going to allow me to mark my bearing lines. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my carpenter square, and going right through those marks, draw a nice solid line. I'm going to use marker so you can see it a little easier. Now that we have bearing lines, the next thing we need to have is a gear slot. You'll see my gear slot is indicated here on the drawing. Much in the same way that I did for the bearing lines, I'm going to place it and I'm going to mark where the end of the gear slot is. And then I'm going to even this piece up and I'm going to mark how wide the gear slot is. Then using my carpenter square, I will extend lines up and across. And again, I'm using marker so you can see. You'd be better served using pencil. That way it can be erased or more easily covered. But we're marking this on the bottom of our car. That way no one's going to see my marking. So now I have my gear slot right in there. I need to cut that piece out. And the bearing lines are here and here. So now that I've marked my gear slot and my bearing lines, I need to cut my gear slot out before I attach the bearings. That way I don't have to cut through the bearing after I glue it onto the bottom of my car. So you'll notice I'm on this cutting mat. You'll remember from our hobby knife safety that we always want to cut on top of that. If your base is made out of something other than foam board like balsa wood, you're going to need to use the scroll saw for this procedure, but it's going to be the same thing. You need to get it out one way or another. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take my straight edge here, which we learned about. We want to keep our hands on this side of that metal bar, because if my thumb's out over here, I still run the risk of running up onto the bar and cutting it. If you must put your thumb on this side, please put it above where you'll be cutting so that you cut away from yourself. I'm going to use my hobby knife and I'm going to jab in. I'm going to pull on the line until I reach the other part of my gear slot. And I'll give that 2 or 3 passes to make sure I cut through the paper on the bottom. And I will then do the same thing down these lines. Again, keeping my thumb above where I'm cutting. So when we pause the screen there, I finished up cutting this, and you'll notice that the gear slot is there. It does not look as if it's been cut at all. That is because you have to take your hands and physically remove that material. Always make sure when you're done that your hobby knife has the cap on. Be careful when putting the cap on. And now we have our gear slot cut. It's time to glue our bearings right onto our bearing line. So when we come back, we will be set for gluing. So now I have my base piece on my gluing board, which is clearly indicated by the large glue here. I'm going to make sure that my hot glue gun is hot, not by squirting out a bunch, but I'm going to squeeze the trigger a little bit. And I see glue comes out. And I am ready to glue. what I will do is I will take this piece, and for my front bearing I will apply a nice line of glue. And you don't have to be shy with how much glue you use, because it's the bottom of your car, no one will ever see that. And then while the glue is still hot, while wearing gloves, you're going to want to carefully position that right on top of the line. Okay, if I see the line, that means I'm not straight on it, which means my bearings would not be parallel, which would be a bad thing. I'm going to do the same thing for my rear bearing. I'm actually going to glue it right over the gear slot opening. Okay, so we're going to do that off the screen. When you come back, we'll have our bearing. So now we have our bearings on the car. You'll notice that we have extra hanging off, and that's all right, because instead of having to measure when we put these on, if we just glue all the way across, now that the glue is dry, we can just come back with scissors and snip these to the length that we desire. We're also going to need to snip out the inside of this gear slot, because the gear is going to need to pop up off the axle through this opening. So we're going to trim our bearings down and trim it out of our gear slot. But when we trim, we want to be mindful of some things. We don't want the wheels to end up rubbing on the sides of our chassis. That's going to add friction that we don't want, slowing the wheels down. So in each of these wheels, it's tough to see, but there is a small hub. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the little circle that comes out. That's what the axle fits into. And we want to give a little buffer, a little extra space on the side, so that that's rubbing on the straw and not the side of the car. So to trim our bearings down, what we could do is we could go right up to the edge, then just go a little bit off of the edge. Leave like a couple of millimeters of extra material off the edge. And that's going to prevent our wheels from rubbing right up against the side. It's going to make a big difference in the amount of friction we experience. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to trim the inside of the gear slot and the rest of this as well. So now we have nice parallel bearings. We have our gear slot cut, and we're ready to move on and attach the wheels, axles, and gears. So in our next video, we're going to assemble the transmission as well as complete the wheel system, so that we will have a rolling board that goes zoom zoom. In the meantime, always make sure that you follow all the safety rules, and if you're ever unsure of how to use a tool or what the safety rules are for that tool, you can go ahead and look in your safety manual, or better yet, just ask your teacher to clarify. Thanks, and have a great day.